Apple once had just 90 days of cash left. By 1997, it had posted a $740 million quarterly loss, the largest in Silicon Valley at the time, and revenue had been sliding for years. Massive layoffs in 1997, with roughly 2,700 people cut in one round, underscored how close the company was to collapse. Even its most loyal customers questioned whether Apple could survive. What followed became one of the most studied turnarounds in tech history. In this story, we'll walk through three levers that pulled Apple back: ruthless product focus, strategic partnerships that bought time, and design-led ecosystem building. Each one offers a repeatable playbook for leaders facing near-death moments. But before those decisions reshaped Apple's destiny, the company had to hit bottom when once celebrated design suddenly failed to excite. Apple's unraveling began when its reputation for clarity and innovation gave way to confusion. Instead of a streamlined product line, customers faced a proliferation of overlapping models: Performance, Quadras, LCs, and PowerBooks that overlapped in specs but muddied the brand. The once simple promise of Mac equals simplicity devolved into a noisy, fragmented catalog that frustrated both buyers and sales teams. At the same time, Mac market share had dropped into single digits by the mid-90s, sliding further toward the low single digits by the decade's end as Windows machines flooded offices and homes. To counter its stalling momentum, Apple invested years in a next-generation operating system codenamed Copeland. But the project repeatedly slipped deadlines and never shipped a stable version. By the mid-90s, Copeland was effectively abandoned. Entire engineering teams had been tied up on a project with no payoff, leaving Apple empty-handed and forced to start exploring external operating system options. This failure set the stage for Next to suddenly look like a viable lifeline. Meanwhile, Microsoft delivered Windows 95 to tens of millions of new users, backed by broad hardware compatibility and aggressive licensing. For enterprises and home users alike, Windows looked like the safer, more flexible bet. Developers followed the volume, leaving Apple's shrinking ecosystem with fewer applications and even less appeal quarter by quarter. Leadership churn deepened the crisis. John Sculley stepped down in 1993 after more than a decade at the helm. His successor, Michael Spindler, lasted barely 2 turbulent years. Gil Amelio followed in 1996, but his tenure quickly became another patchwork of reorganizations and shifting strategies. Inside Apple, this felt like whiplash. Teams invested months into products that were canceled or renamed before launch. Employees stopped believing that any single plan would stick. The problem wasn't just bad execution, it was the absence of a coherent vision. Strategy resembled scattershot bets: too many products, too many priorities, and no magnetic center to hold them together. Morale sank. Steve Jobs, during an early return visit, captured the mood with brutal honesty. "The products suck. There's no sex in them anymore." That blunt assessment echoed what many inside the company already knew but rarely said. Apple's magic was gone. Financial results confirmed the free fall. In the first quarter of 1997 alone, Apple posted a $740 million loss. Far worse, 1997 became the only year in Apple's history where it lost money in every quarter, totaling over $1 billion in annual losses. Wall Street speculated openly about dismantling the company, either through asset sales or outright liquidation. Headlines framed Apple less as a turnaround candidate and more as a cautionary tale already sealed. At this point, with products misaligned, its operating system stalled, and its balance sheet bleeding, Apple had exhausted most conventional options. The board faced a decision that looked more like a gamble than a plan, and it involved betting hundreds of millions on an unlikely source of salvation. Why would a company on financial life support choose to buy another struggling firm? In early 1997, Apple paid roughly $400 to acquire Next, selecting it over BOS because Next Step offered a ready-made foundation for a modern operating system. On the surface, the deal was about replacing Apple's failed Copeland project with technology that could scale into the future. But it also carried a second consequence. It brought Steve Jobs back into the building. 12 years after his ouster, Jobs initially re-entered as an advisor. His role sounded limited, but his influence grew quickly. Teams sought out his opinion, and board members noticed that decisions increasingly tilted his way. Gil Amelio remained CEO for the first half of the year, but his grip weakened as confidence eroded. By July 1997, the board pushed Amelio out, and by September, Jobs accepted the title of interim CEO, confirming what had already become clear inside. The axis of authority had shifted. Jobs wasted little time reframing Apple's direction. In a leadership meeting, he sketched a 2x2 grid, consumer versus professional on one axis, desktop versus portable on the other. Apple would build one product for each box, nothing more. That order meant cutting the bulk of the existing catalog, including machines that had consumed years of work. The exercise was less about theatrics than discipline. For employees long used to shifting priorities, the grid defined a sharp set of boundaries. If a project didn't fit, it ended. Focus, though, did not resolve the cash problem. In August 1997, Apple announced a surprising partnership. Microsoft would invest $150 million in non-voting shares and guarantee continued development of Office for the Mac. On stage at Macworld, Steve Jobs unveiled the deal to a chorus of boos from parts of the audience. For many, Microsoft was seen as the enemy. Jobs countered with a simple reframing. Apple didn't need Microsoft to fail in order to succeed. The logic of the agreement was practical. The cash bought runway, but the Office commitment provided something even more valuable: credibility with businesses, schools, and developers who might otherwise abandon the platform. With that reassurance, Apple stabilized just enough to move forward. For investors, Microsoft's involvement signaled that the company still had allies with a financial stake in its survival. By the close of 1997, Apple possessed three critical levers it had lacked before. Next supplied the technological reboot, Microsoft provided cash and developer confidence, and Jobs' product grid enforced ruthless focus. Together, these moves gave Apple space to look beyond mere survival. The question now was whether any single product could prove Apple still mattered. To customers, to the press, and to the broader market watching closely. In 1998, Apple put its turnaround to the test with the launch of the iMac. Introduced in May, the machine broke sharply from the beige boxes that defined PCs at the time. Its translucent Bondi blue shell revealed structural elements, making the computer itself a kind of display piece. But the design wasn't just cosmetic. The iMac ditched the floppy drive, embraced USB ports, and shipped as internet-ready during the first wave of home internet adoption. Those choices resonated. Within 5 months, Apple sold about 800,000 units, a clear sign the market was paying attention. Initial reactions from analysts were skeptical. Many wrote it off as a novelty, too colorful for businesses, too radical for serious users. But two dynamics worked in Apple's favor. Consumers were eager for something fresh, and lapsed Apple loyalists were waiting for any proof the company could still innovate. The product's reception in stores and in the press quickly overturned the doubts. The iMac's sales and the renewed developer interest produced consecutive profitable quarters in 1998, $44 million in Q1, and $309 million for the fiscal year, evidence the turnaround was working. Underneath that spark was a new alignment at the top. Jobs brought Johnny Ive into the center of product development, making design a strategic lever rather than decoration. Ive had considered leaving during the company's decline, but Jobs' conviction kept him engaged. Their partnership created a new cadence. Products conceived with design and engineering intertwined from the start, rather than design applied at the finish. This shift became a defining element of Apple's rhythm going forward. Culture reinforced the product moves. The Think Different campaign, launched in 1997, didn't highlight hardware specs. It celebrated creativity, invention, and iconoclasts. The message landed both externally and internally. Apple wasn't just surviving, it stood for originality. For employees, that was an invitation to work on products with purpose. For customers, it was a reminder that Apple's value wasn't in competing on sameness, but in standing apart. While Jobs and Ive shaped the front end, Tim Cook stepped in behind the scenes to change how Apple operated. Joining in early 1998 as head of operations, he cut bloated inventory weeks and streamlined the supply chain. These moves reduced risk, freed up cash, and ensured products could reach customers faster. It wasn't as visible as the iMac's Bondi Blue case, but it gave Apple the financial runway and efficiency advantage that later launches depended on. The net effect was momentum that felt different from the short-lived wins of Apple's past. The iMac showed that focus, design, and operations could line up to create both sales and confidence. More importantly, it rebuilt trust among customers and developers who had nearly written Apple off. That spark turned survival into a foundation and opened the door for even bigger bets still to come. How do you turn a single design breakthrough into a lasting growth engine? For Apple, the answer came through expanding one product win into a connected system. By the early 2000s, the company moved beyond the iMac and targeted music. Apple released the iPod in late 2001 and paired it with iTunes software to manage digital libraries. 2 years later, in 2003, the iTunes Store arrived, creating a hardware-software content loop that competitors couldn't match. An iPod purchase wasn't just hardware, it tied every user more closely to Apple's ecosystem. Most portable music players at the time were clunky, with awkward syncing and fragmented experiences. Apple's version was sleek, reliable, and integrated directly with Macs. But the breakthrough wasn't appearance alone. With iTunes and the iTunes Store in place, every song purchase reinforced the value of owning an iPod and, by extension, a Mac. That cycle made Apple's growth compounding rather than transactional, shifting the business from device sales to ecosystem lock-in. Distribution was another essential lever. Up until this point, Macs were largely pushed through third-party retailers, where competing PCs commanded attention at the front of the store. Jobs disrupted that model by opening 2 Apple retail stores in May 2001. These spaces weren't traditional outlets designed for immediate volume. They were built to control the customer experience end-to-end and to demonstrate how Apple products, services, and software work together. That retail channel became the funnel that transformed casual interest into long-term loyalty. The results validated the approach. The iPod became a cultural icon, pulling in users who had never owned an Apple product before. Many students and young professionals started with an iPod, then moved to buy a Mac later, what analysts called the halo effect. For Apple, the lesson went deeper. Each product could become marketing for the next. Operationally, That meant Apple converted product marketing into a channel for future device sales, designing experiences, so one product increased lifetime value across others. Meanwhile, Next Step evolved into the foundation for Mac OS X, finally released in 2001. This gave Apple a modern, scalable software architecture that could anchor both computers and new devices. The technology tie-in provided the unifying platform that made future integrations, like blending a phone, computer, and music player into a single device, possible. By the mid-2000s, Apple's identity had shifted. It was no longer just a computer maker with flashes of good design. It had become an ecosystem company built on products that reinforced each other, supported by a consistent architecture, retail presence, and cultural message. Each move stacked strategically, building a repeatable system rather than a string of lucky bets. And inside that system sits a clear operational lesson. Transformation doesn't come from chasing every idea, but from making deliberate choices about which levers to pull and which to cut. Apple's rebound can be traced to three levers that leaders anywhere can study: a narrowed product focus, a protected ecosystem, and tight alignment between design and operations. Those choices weren't abstract. They showed up quickly in numbers. Within months, Apple climbed back to profitability. Q1 1998 delivered a $44 million profit, and fiscal 1998 closed with $309 million in the black. If you face a similar crisis, start by cutting product complexity, securing a short cash runway, and aligning design with operations from day one. If you want more turnaround playbooks with the exact levers and numbers, subscribe.